Warm welcome to Boards Impact Forum's webinar on owner perspectives and their collaborations with boards on sustainability and climate change. My name is Elisabeth Engstam. I'm the chair of Boards Impact Forum, and it's the Nordic chapter of the Climate Governance Initiative in collaboration with World Economic Forum. We are very grateful to all of our partners, and we will come back to that in the end of the presentation. Today, I'm going to do a short introduction together with the moderator, Jakob, and then we will have some reflections of Professor Morten Huse, and then following that, we will have reflections from the owners, board chair, NEDs, and education perspectives. We will have a small poll to ask for your insights, and then we will have a moderated discussion. We are, of course, glad if you'd like to share any of this on social media, and then you can use any of the board's Impact Forum, Climate Governance, or Responsible Governance as a hashtag. Questions. We would be very delighted if you can put questions or perspectives in the Q&A, and our operations director, Cecilia Widebeck-West, will help you handle that. And if you'd like to join us, you will find more of the information on our website, boardsimpactforum.com, or follow us on social media. So what do? We run webinars, we run partner events, we run peer group exchanges. You can find more of this on our website. We actually also run a bit of research and surveys, and we do all of that aligned with the 8 climate governance principles that is published by World Economic Forum. In our case, we do it both for the climate position, but also for the broader full sustainability position. That brings me to the delight to introduce to you Jakob Stengel, who is the chair of the Danish board network, but also a founding board member of Boards Impact Forum. Over to you, Jakob.
Thank you so much, Liselott, for that kind introduction. I am quickly going to hand it over to our first presenter. I just want to bring your attention to the very international audience that all our viewers are part of. We have 69% Nordic attendees, 31% from the rest of the world, from a total of 24 countries. So a warm welcome to all of you. Our first speaker will introduce the subject. It's one of the most experienced experts in the Nordic region on the work of boards. It's Professor Morten Huse. Warm welcome to you, Morten. Over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to share with you. And I'm going to have a few framing reflections on owner perspectives and collaboration with boards on sustainability and climate change. And I'm not going to respond to all the different questions being there, but put in a few of the things that may be of importance for discussing some of these things later. You can take the next slide. So here are some of the questions that typically have been asked, and we are supposed to try to get into. And my comment is these are some questions that also takes us into trying to see what we can do to make a better world together. So these are basically some of the questions being raised. You can take the next question there again. With some of my background, I've been on a journey through many things and trying to work with questions also going into the future, but also from working on the micro level, understanding individual people, what is motivating them, trying to see how we can do something for a better future, but also going further into what's making us work with boards and corporations. But still, among the challenges we have today is trying to see how we can go from this micro individual to the macro level, which means the overall, what can we do to do something for the future, sustainability, the society. And when I've been putting some of the green letters on the top part, that is, I'll follow all the way around. It's that you should remember that is also about climate change. The discussion we have now is not only about climate change, but it's on all our thinking. Personally, I've been working on things related to academia. It is, well, you can still keep the one. Academia with boards of directors, questions about getting women on boards and ways of doing it, and then really understanding some of the main challenges in the world. You can take the next picture. The next slide. And from research side, partly some theoretical things I will try to introduce. Well, it is quite complex and many things to get into, but I think we need to understand some of the stakeholder perspectives, understanding who have stakes and who have power and what we are doing and what organizations are doing. We need to understand the difference between internal stakeholders and external stakeholders who are working in the company or working on the board, compared to governments, compared to customers, clients. Well, what we call shareholders, internal and external, can be discussed. But then we have the discussion between stakeholders and shareholders. And how are they different? Are they the same in different ways? And who are setting the standards? We need to understand the thinking long-term versus short-term. If we take the shareholder perspectives for a while, or try to understand shareholders and ownership. Well, ownership and shareholding is not exactly the same, but we need to understand that there are variations between private and public, active and versus passive shareholders. And there are lots of different ownership types and owner structures. I've been so fortunate to meet with and learn and study different ownership types about minority shareholders, how they are coordinating their efforts to try to do something. And if you go to majority shareholders, we're seeing the major differences. And then the structures we find among it. And if we think about it, most investors or most companies are family investors or family firms. And then there are alternative ways of thinking. And then we need to get into the understanding of some of the things that are called social emotional wealth and paternalism and altruism and nepotism. And where are these, how are these things coming into how we're thinking and doing? Is it all about altruism, or are we getting into some of the private emotional things behind it? We can take the next picture. When we're talking about board, I've so far been talking about shareholders and stakeholders, but we also need to understand the different ways of understanding boards of directors. So the typical way of thinking about boards, which we can take from accounting and law, is that board is a formal body that we're needing to relate to. But typically, boards are not working. They're just following a manager in some way. And that's the standard in most companies. If we are trying to get understanding how boards have been seen from many ways, on this Swedish board, I think it's from Sweden, the main questions on the agenda in these boards is whether we should extend the top or the number of years a person can be on the board, or that he's suggesting that we should increase the age limits of board members. That's the most important questions for these boards. And this is from actually, I'm finding many examples of that, and also in several boards I've been in. The most important is not what the board is doing, but what I'm getting back myself. I'm getting a network, it's good on my CV, I'm learning from it. That's not what a board is supposed to be. That is a sociological way of thinking. And if you take for them, well, this is a Viking or a barbarian way of thinking about boards. And typically this is considered to be some of the finance perspectives where you're coming in from the outside. You are wanting to return on your investments, and you have your weapons in doing so. But it's not always that investors are knowing what the companies are doing, and they may not even know their language. And they might be like the Vikings, robbing and raping and leaving and not thinking about sustainability of the company. So that's one of the challenges when you're taking from the perspectives from investors and in many settings and ID things on the stock exchanges. I would think that it's very positive to have many of these things I just mentioned about from the family investors coming in. My perspectives on boards and what I think is important for the future is what I would call the value creating boards, where everybody are involved in trying to do something for the company. That's unless you're creating values in the company, it's hard also to create values outside. So where you're standing up and willing to work and do the work together. So that's the more the entrepreneurial way of thinking about boards. And we need to think about these differences. A board is not straightforward a board. We need to know which glasses we're using when we're getting into understanding boards and what we're doing with it. My perspective, as you may have been knowing already, is mostly from the strategy on the entrepreneurship part. We can take the next picture. The additional dimension that I think is important to get into is trying to see what's happening with the future. Are we doing like what we're seeing in Qatar with the Qatar Foundation, where they're seeing they're getting oil? They're trying to learn from the Scandinavian countries, and particularly Norway, in how they are making investments because they know their oil will disappear. So now they're investing in lots of alternative things to be able to keep a sustainable society. But as we in Scandinavia and also in Norway, we are novices. We don't really know what's happening. So they're trying, and we should try to find possibilities. Sometimes we are not successful, sometimes we are. And we're seeing that many of the things we are working on is highly influenced by digitalization. So when understanding about boards and digitalization, we need to see the different layers or different levels in this pyramid of digitalization. That is not only implementing digital tools, it's not only having digital knowledge on the boards, it's not just thinking about the task boards are doing to be able to use the digital possibilities. We may experience a situation where we must rethink not only the cooperation and the value creation, but the whole background for boards. We may not have boards, we may not have corporations in the same way in the future based on this digital way of learning. And we have been getting into that very fast now, with getting more into the Corona situation. I was in the Arab Middle East for a second. Now I'm going into, for example, India or different ways of knowledge. If you go to Ganesha or the God of Wisdom, or we may go into Vishnu or other Indian gods and the reflections behind. Well, it's not only India, but we need to put on different sets of glasses to help us see the world from different perspectives. And because that discussions we should go into when meeting the climate change, when meeting the sustainability criteria for we're discussing. It's not only about the company, it's not only about our boards, it is relating now to the whole world. We can take the next picture. We're going fast. If we're going for United Nations global goals, then I think all of them are talking to us. We see the needs for getting into each of them. Focus here now is that on climate change, but it's also very much on some of these other things. So poverty, hunger, health, education, gender equality, clean water, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, innovation, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities, life below water, life on land, place and justice, and partnership for the goals, which are more or less, I think I was mentioning them, including the climate action. And we need to take our perspectives from the individual to the organizational and societal perspectives. we need to prepare sustainability for a higher level of value creation, and that needs a radical change, radical new thinking in how we're doing. We can take the next one again. So giving a kind of a summary for the presentation now, it's we need to rethink value creation. And there are different triggers for these radical changes. Some of these triggers are taking us into existential questions, the future of our world, the future of our societies. And they include the climate change, they include the pandemics, they include the globalization, poverty, migration, and terrorism. We were just seeing the terrorism 20 years ago, how that was coming back. Well, things are moving fast. Humanity will change more in the next 20 years than the previous 300 years. Well, we're needing to move to a higher level of value creation. And then it's the question, is it possible to meet these urgent and immediate actions through voluntary actions, or do we need regulations? Is it so that we can use the same kind of thinking in all societies? What we're learning from the US or the UK is that the same that we will do in the Nordic countries or in continental Europe. Then we also need to know some of the histories about how laws are made and how we typically are implementing the things we are doing. We have in the Scandinavian countries a civil law system, while in other places we have a common law system, and they are fundamentally different in how we are implementing different things. And personally, I was happy to be a part of the discussion about gender equality and doing something about gender quotas on boards, and to learn more about what's happening. Do we need regulations, national regulations, or voluntary actions? Will they be enough? So the basic challenge for all of us is that regardless of where we are, we need to find ways to make a better world together. And they may include that we go for governments to make regulations. We can take the next pictures. And then I'm just going to thank for me and challenge you to be a part of that as making a better world together. So thank you so much for the attention.
Thank you so much, Morten, for taking us through that rather intensive overview of the agenda and your perspective on that. Very, very strong framing. Thank you so much for that. Taking it from Norway to our next speaker in Sweden, I'm very happy to hand it over to Jens Schlyter, who is the Deputy Director for Sustainable Business at the Department for State-Owned Enterprises at the Swedish Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation. Jens is also a first-hand practitioner in board work, being a board member in the governmentally owned entity Svenska Spel. Handing it over to you, Jens. Looking forward to hearing your presentation. You need to unmute yourself. Thanks.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Jakob. I'm very pleased and honored to have been given the opportunity to present to this audience. But before getting into the subject of sustainability and the different roles for owners and boards, I just want to say a few words about the portfolio that I'm representing, since I believe that will put better into perspective the part with sustainable business. So the portfolio of Swedish enterprises, state-owned enterprises, consists of 40 fully owned and 6 partly owned, and 2 of them are listed. And the total value is around 700 billion SEK. And most of them operate in a fully competitive market. So it's obviously important that they, like privately owned companies, take a long-term approach, are efficient and profitable, and also are given the capacity to develop. The portfolio is quite diverse and consists of companies in many different sectors: basic industry, energy, telecom, services, and property, etc. And the fact that the portfolio is so diverse has been important to keep in mind when setting up and implementing the framework for sustainable business. It must work with all the different companies. Next slide, please. So I have been asked to say just a few words about the key tools and key processes for interactions that we use, and they're all represented on this slide. Most of them are in this little circle. But I just want to say a few words about the state ownership policy, which is the main document when it comes to the governance of the state-owned enterprises. And the policy sets out the mandates and objectives and important requirements and priorities for the owner. And one chapter deals with sustainable value creation and the requirements and expectations when it comes to sustainable business. And it's actually quite explicit when it comes to the fact that the owner sees sustainable business as an important factor when it comes to sustainable value creation. But at the ministry where I work, there's an ownership department. The department consists of investment directors and experts in company analysis, sustainable business, commercial law, board recruitment. And the investment directors each serve on a number of enterprise boards and lead the work in the investment teams. So that's in that capacity that I'm on the board of Svenska Spel. And the investment teams, there's one for all company holdings in the portfolio, and they handle all the ongoing ownership issues and conducts analysis, etc., works with the financial targets and also with sustainable business. And moving on a little bit in the circle, we have nomination of the boards, which is obviously a very important tool for the owner. And the investment organization here at the ministry has its own board search advisors, and they evaluate the boards of the SOEs and put forward proposals for chairs and other directors. And the analysis that they do is based on different board evaluations, the owner's evaluation and the board's evaluation, input from the investment teams, different discussions with the chair, for example. And I think it's about 40 to 60 new directors that are elected each year. Then we have the targets and tracking, very important instruments also for the governance. We have 3 sets of targets, financial targets, and a second set of targets that is specific to this portfolio, I'd say, is the public policy targets that are set for the companies that have specifically adopted public policy assignment. And that's about half of them. And one example is obviously the Swedish alcohol monopoly. And then we have the third set of targets, which is strategic targets for sustainable value creation. And they are set by the boards, while the financial targets and the public policy targets are set by the owner through the AGM. And all of these targets are tracked and followed up through the owner dialogue. And the owner dialogue is where the political leadership meet regularly with the boards and board chairs and management, usually the MD, at these owner dialogues. And we discuss public policy targets, the financial targets, the other issues, and the strategic targets for sustainable value creation as well. And sometimes when such an analysis has been conducted, we also discuss a sustainability analysis. And the sustainability analysis is a tool that we're using in the investment organization, basically to evaluate how the companies work on sustainable business. And they can be undertaken as a separate project, or they can be undertaken as part of a project where we're setting the financial targets, and the recommendations are presented to the boards in the end. Next slide, please. Act as a role model. That's being stated in the policy. And what does that mean? Well, the companies must work strategically with sustainable business, and that's been stressed all the time, that it's a strategic issue and it's the responsibility of the boards, and they need to set goals. Also, we encourage companies to collaborate with other companies and other relevant organizations to get better and find solutions to common challenges. And we also facilitate this process that we organize within the ownership organization. We organize network meetings and workshops where we invite all of the different companies in the portfolio. And we have about 4 such meetings per year. They must act transparently. Obviously, they are owned by the Swedish people, so transparency is obviously a very important aspect in that regard. And then the last pillar is to comply with international guidelines. Next slide, please. The ownership policy is revised when deemed necessary, and on this slide I have highlighted some of the major changes and other important activities that we have been undertaking to inspire the companies over the last years when it comes to sustainable business. I'll just mention a few of them. I think we can share this afterwards so that you can have a more closer look at it. But in 2007, the first requirement was included in the policy, where there was a requirement to report the sustainability performance according to the Global Reporting Initiative. And then the next couple of steps have been to actually clarify, which is very important, I think, what do we actually mean by sustainable business and which areas are included. And then it was also, so that was clearly stated, and it was also stated that the board had a responsibility for sustainability and that they should set strategic sustainability targets. So that was an important step. And the next step was taken, or not the next step, but another important step was in 2016, where we introduced the Agenda 2030 as an important framework, but then also moved and said that now we want the companies to set strategic targets for sustainable business. So basically trying to get them to move from separate sustainability strategies to sustainable and integrated strategies. So a more mature approach, if you like. And then in 2020, which is when the last revision of the policy was made, one thing was that we introduced the requirement for the companies to manage and report on climate-related financial risks and opportunities. And then we made another small revision to the targets that we ask the boards to set and move and set strategic targets for sustainable value creation. I'll elaborate a bit more on that on the next slide. But looking back, I think you can say that the steps that have been taken during these years is a development going from reporting to strategic integration. That's been the wish from the owner. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, the requirements for targets for sustainable value creation were introduced last year. On this slide, I have included the criteria for the targets, but to put it short, we have been moving from a situation where the boards, we asked them to adopt separate strategic targets for sustainable business. And now we ask them to take a more comprehensive approach and ask them to take account of aspects that are material to their operations and set targets. But of course, sustainable business is one of them that we're pointing out as something that should be part of these targets. And we think that the companies are ready for this step. There's an example to the right from Vattenfall, and you can take a closer look at that, at these targets in their annual report if you want. And I think that we'll come back to some of the lessons learned from the ownership perspective, but just a few are the tone from the top, be clear on expectations and take a long-term view, integrate sustainable business in the governance processes and make it part of the interactions that you have with the board. And introduce new measures in a balanced and timely manner, challenge the companies, but make it achievable. Make sure that you also allow the companies that want to be at the forefront, that they are able to actually be at the forefront. And have internal competence on sustainable business in the organization so that you can both challenge and inspire the companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jens. Very brief overview of a very big portfolio. But from one big investor in Sweden to another, we will be handing it over to Viveka Hirdman-Ryrberg, who is the head of corporate communication and sustainability with the institutional investor, Investor AB, or institutional, I say, but at least a very, very big private investor. It's over to you, Viveka.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to this seminar today. And it's quite good, I think, that Jens and I follow after each other. Investor AB, just as you were saying, Jakob, we are a very large owner, and we are also a very long-term owner, and we've been around for 100+ years. And we are always an engaged owner. We are always very, very active in the companies we have an ownership in. We have a net asset value of somewhere 600 billion SEK plus. And we have holdings in 24 different companies. 2/3 of our portfolio is a portfolio of listed companies, companies like Electrolux, SEB, ABB, Atlas Copco, etc. And then we have a portfolio of wholly owned subsidiaries, Nordic and North American companies. And then we are also the largest owner in the private equity company EQT. And just to give a very, very brief overview of our model and how, when I say we are an engaged owner, I would like to lift it up one level and just to say that our purpose, why we are here, and that really defines us. And our purpose is we create value for people and society by building strong and sustainable businesses. And it really defines us because behind those words is that we invest and engaged in strong companies, usually in the forefront in their industry. We have a very clear governance model. What's the role for us as owners? What's the role for the board? And what's the role for the management in the companies? We take great care to work with and see to it that we have the right person in the right place. Again, with our governance model for the boards, and the boards then in the companies. We are part of our model is to really work with networks. So we work, all the chairs in the companies, they meet in a chair circle. Going back to competence and the right people, all the HR heads meet in a network. All the sustainability heads in all the companies meet and to share knowledge. So the network modeling is extremely important. And also because in all the listed companies, we are usually the largest owner, the lead owner. So we usually also chair the nomination committee, with the nomination committee being part of the Swedish corporate governance model. And finally, I would like to say also that we take great care to maintain a strong financial position, and also that our companies are financially sound in order to be able to have the agility necessary. We work with what we call value creation plans for each company we are engaged in. We have defined and worked out what one could call a business plan for that company with a perspective of maybe 3 to 5 years ahead, even though we are extremely long-term owners, but execution in the short term is of course always very essential. And in these value creation plans is of course sort of the business of the company, working with efficiency and so on, but also in all companies investing in automation, digitalization, and also in sustainability, because we want sustainability to be integrated fully in the business model. So we have a traffic light system for our value creation plans, and we also do that with the sustainability hat on. When it comes to being more specific on, in terms of our sustainability work, to us, it's something about the long-term competitiveness of the companies we are engaged in. We see it as a way of future-proofing our companies. So what we have done is that we have geared up our work as owners. We have worked through what is material for us as owners, and it's business ethics and governance, it's climate and resource efficiency, and it's diversity and inclusion. We have set long-term targets, tangible targets as of 2030, where we want to reach these targets from a portfolio perspective. We have 10 sustainability guidelines, which we want all the companies to adhere to. The first principle being that sustainability should be integrated in the business model. But also, just to mention 2 or 3 of the other guidelines in our 10-point guidelines, is we want the companies to work with what is material for them and the boards to set tangible KPIs for those material issues. We want the companies to not only have the policies, but also the processes and resources in place to work with their to deliver on their targets. And of course, we want the companies to transparently report on their progress. I know we are a bit, maybe a bit short of time, but I just want to say that when we started gearing up our work, and again, being such a large owner, we can see more or less directly the impact we can make. And just to take the issue of climate, we set out a long-term target for 2030 with 2016 as the base year, absolute emissions. And now, as of 2020, we have a reduction in our portfolio, absolute levels of 40%. I think I stop there, and so that we will have time for Christoph and also for a panel discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Viveka. Coming from Sweden, going directly to Finland, very happy to be able to introduce to you somebody who works with these agenda items from a variety of roles. Christoph Vitzthum, who is not only the CEO of the Fazer group, also the chairman of Konecranes, and also a non-executive director of the 2 investment companies, Nordstjernan and Oras Invest. The floor is all yours, Christoph. Looking very much forward to it.
All right, thank you very much, and hello to everyone from me as well. I think I'll continue from where Viveka left off on the subject of long-term competitiveness, and that's of course an issue that boards and owners are very much focusing on. Perhaps I'd also like to share my perspective as somebody representing owners, as somebody representing boards, and as somebody representing management. And if we then focus on sustainability and climate change as the topic for this session, let me start by saying that sustainability is good business. And I think this is one thing that more and more companies are realizing, and moving away from seeing sustainability as a ticking the boxes kind of exercise, and humoring certain stakeholders to appear green or to appear sustainable or to appear modern. And why am I saying that this is good business? I'm saying it's good business because of the long-term competitiveness aspect, and looking at what stakeholders today are expecting from companies. The topics around sustainability, around combating climate change are becoming ever more important. I think we're all in companies and businesses around the world struggling to find good employees to take us to the future, and especially when recruiting young people. Increasingly, we are seeing that we are facing dialogues around the topics of values, around sustainability, around climate change, and if companies cannot answer these questions in a believable manner, young people will choose to go work for somebody else. The same thing applies to investors, to financiers, to customers, and I think as a CEO of a company, I am having to more and more answer sustainability and climate change related questions to stakeholders, and that's why I'm saying it's also good business, because modern companies that are forward-looking and have forward-looking boards and forward-looking owners ensure that climate change and sustainability are on the agenda of the company in the way that investor is also doing with their own companies. Then I think another perspective is that I think it's important to understand that industries move at a different pace, and companies also move at a different pace, and I see big differences, for example, in the food industry, which I'm representing in my day job, so to say, and in more capital goods type of businesses, where in engineering companies, where, for example, I'm the chairman of Konecranes, and inherently there is, of course, a difference when it comes to the discourse in companies working in consumer goods or in heavy engineering, but I think what is very, very similar in the discourse, or actually in the need for the discourse, it is genuine, and I think more and more companies are also finding this genuine way to put forward their own sustainability message in a believable way, and in a way that moves away from anecdotes more into a factual base, but at the same time, you know, that stakeholders realize that this isn't just jargon. It's actually real stuff that these companies are talking about. Then on the topic of regulation versus voluntary action, I think that because companies are so different, because industries are so different, because geographies are so different, regulation becomes quite difficult, and therefore I'm more of a believer in voluntary measures, assuming, of course, that companies are there to create long-term competitiveness, and that nomination boards or nomination committees or owners populate organizations, boards, and management with forward-looking people in order to push forward on the sustainability agenda. I'll end there and hand over to you again, Jakob.
Thank you so much for those perspectives, Christoph. Much appreciated. It is now time for our panel debate, and I'm going to ask all of our presenters to kindly turn off their mute button so that we won't have too many lags. You know, as a first starting, maybe it's a broad question, but I'm going to open with it anyhow. In your experience, in your opinion, do you believe that there is a certain kind of ownership structure that works best with the theme of sustainability? I'm going to hand it over to you, Jens. I saw a smile there. And obviously, I mean, you are representing the state, but nevertheless, I mean, do you see other ownership structures than other than the state ownership that work equally well with these themes? And do you see any that are not as good?
Yes, yeah, let me start with the situation that I'm coming from. So obviously, I think it's quite a big difference when you are the 100% owner. I think when you that's something that you need to remember, obviously, when you enter the room. It's quite easy when you can make up the policy for the companies that you want to drive in a certain direction, obviously, and you have very good ways of making that happen. You can set up the structure, how you engage with them, and make them use to it, and you can be quite clear on the messages, obviously, where you want them to go. And I think that can certainly in many situations be an advantage to both, I mean, obviously for the ownership organization, but also to the companies. But I think an important aspect is obviously for us to all the time also listen in to what's going on in the world around us and bring that into our ownership model. And for example, it's very inspiring to listening to what Investor has undertaken and the kind of work that they're putting in. So I think that's perhaps one of the important things to bring with you as an owner, to be good at listening and taking other perspectives in. I think when you're working with other owners, it will be part of sort of your normal life to discuss and meet and understand that there can be other and different perspectives. So that's one brief comment on that issue.
Thank you so much, Jens, for sharing that. May I turn it over to you, Viveka? From your perspective, the theme of or the issue of different ownership structures. I mean, you engage in a number of different kind of companies. Some are listed, some are not, but probably the majority are listed, except for the ones that you own through, for instance, the private equity company, EQT, and so on. And that's a question from me to you. I mean, you're a major investor in EQT, but EQT, sorry, not EQT specifically, but private equity isn't normally known for a long-term approach. Please share your views.
Now, going back to your first question, I think different owners and with different time horizons are important. We are one of the extremely long-term owners, but we need, a well-functioning market economy needs different type of owners and ownerships. And also, I think I would really like, to affirm the importance of the business community and driving sustainability. And again, also to be a private, with the private perspective, because it's also about driving long-term profitability, again, going back to the long-term competitiveness. And then you have to innovate, you have to be efficient, you have to make these long-term investment bets. And yes, we have this very long-term ownership perspective, as long as we see that we can bring value to the company. And then there are other owners, for example, private equity. They are usually have a shorter time horizon, but I think you need both types of perspectives.
Okay, thank you. Brilliant. In my view, it's been interesting to see how the whole discussion worldwide around sustainability has kind of moved from a let's say an environmental focus in the beginning to let's say a more viability focused. I mean, where the companies are supposed to be sustainable and viable. You, Christoph, mentioned, I believe, that sustainability is in fact profitable, and I concur absolutely with that. But I also believe that as boards and owners, sometimes we are faced with the reality that not always are the sustainable approach equal to the shareholder return, at least not in the moment. And I'm going to give you an example. I know that different producers of the COVID-19 vaccines have adopted different approaches to selling their vaccines. So some are on a pure profit model, right? And some have made their vaccines accessible to the markets on a non-profit basis, not for free, but on a non-profit basis. The markets have reacted obviously differently to the two different approaches. And you can say, you know, in the short term, most investors would be more interested in those that actually do not sell their vaccines for free. So without going into the vaccine problematics here, how do you view that perception, Christoph? I mean, you know, the balancing of the short and the long term, especially when the sustainable approach is not necessarily equaling what is good for the shareholders in the moment.
All right, that's a good question, a difficult question as well. I think it would not be correct for me to start to guess about companies' business models, and I think you know the answer to your question probably lies in the business model itself. That what is the perspective, time perspective when the companies, you know, are intending to make their money for their owners, assuming of course that is the ultimate goal. I mean, there are of course not-for-profit organizations that never intend to make any money, but that's then a different story. But also if you take for-profit organizations, you can also take a different time perspective on the time to profit element. Now, I think the important thing here is long-term competitiveness and the sustainability of the company across cycles and across you know, time, and there I believe that companies take a fairly similar approach to one another. You know, bearing in mind that there are industry differences and company specific differences, and as well as business model differences, but I think that this whole sustainability discussion also forces boards, forces owners to take a longer term perspective on the company. And that's not saying that all decisions will be made based on a long-term perspective, because there's also short-term needs. But I think it's a healthy development, at least, that you are forced to look at it over a longer cycle.
Absolutely agree. Morten, I'm a bit curious. We saw on the slides that Jens presented that the theme of sustainability is ever evolving. I mean, with the different policies being adopted on the state-owned companies in Sweden, that it takes into account more and more different angles. What is your prediction? I mean, what is going to be next within the issue of sustainability and the entirety of stakeholder capitalism? What will be the next issue that is not necessarily part of the discussion today, but will be an item of priority next?
Unfortunately, I don't have any conclusions to that. So I've been very happy to learn about your presentation about value creating boards, and some of you know that's among the things I've been talking about around many different places. But when thinking about value creation and understanding some of your questions behind it, we're now seeing some of the urgency. The urgency more than they've ever seen before. It's partly, or it's directly related to the climate crisis or the climate situation that we cannot afford waiting. And that's a question about what can be done. Do we need to find, also how do we find alternatives? Well, I've been fascinating to learn those discussing disruptive innovation, really radical innovation, and seeing also how this may be coming by what's been happening now. I'm wondering if that when we are setting some targets or standards, we need also not only to have a carrot, we also need to have a whip behind. It may be that we need to introduce maybe not all criteria at the same time, but maybe one at a time. But it's urgent. We need to do something. And when we are setting some standards, that might be regulations in some places somewhere, but at least they're becoming so important that business people, board members are seeing that unless we are meeting these standards on a voluntary basis, we may see that it's going to be compulsory.
Yeah.
I don't think we can afford waiting to make major changes. I completely agree with Christoph and Viveka and Jens about the long-term perspective that we're really needing. But this is urgent. And it's not only due to the climate crisis, but all the other things we're seeing. If we're going to have people also sustainable in the future, we are needing to have a sustainable society, and that is immediately urgent now. So maybe at least we can have some threats that is going to be prevented if we are not seeing something immediately.
Well, agreed. Urgency is definitely a part of it, and I believe that we also are seeing the whip, at least in some territories. The EU, for instance, are already be imposing or planning to impose a very, very heavy regulation on this. I actually had one question lined up, but that would include both Jens and Viveka at least, and that was on collaborating and knowledge sharing and networking, and how, and that's actually based on a question that we received from the audience, and at the same time avoiding the issue of overstepping or conflicting with the competition law and the risk for cartels. However, we are running out of time. So we will have to take that discussion next time we all meet. I mean, this too is a forum for collaboration and knowledge sharing. And I'm so happy that you would all join in with us. I know, Liselott, that you have a few things which is next on the agenda for the Board Impact Forum. So I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you all for contributing there. Very, very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Morten for summary, Christopher or Viveka and Jens for all your generous sharings and super inspiring. We will all try to find all kinds of ideas. We are going to document this into a little blog post and share that. We are super grateful to everybody who has listened in. Of course, to Jakob for moderating this and to the operations committee and the board. We're also grateful to our partners, FCG, DLA Piper, Prime, and to the fantastic group of board networks, the Swedish Board Academy, the Danish Board Academy, Boardman, Scandinavian Executive Institute, the Norwegian Institute of Directors, and the Directors Institute of Finland. We're actually by now reaching 10,000 board members, and we will now continue to work to impact them even further. So, going forward, of course, look into our website. You can learn all there, and you will also see all of the webinars there. The next one that's just announced is on October 29, and it's going to be focusing in on board's contribution to corporate renewal and sustainability. So it's actually research done with INSEAD Professor Ludo van der Heyden, Innovation Professor Mats Magnusson, and actually myself and another member of our team. We are super delighted to be able to introduce to you Luisa Delgado, who is a very experienced leader and NED, and Asthildur Ottarsdottir, who's also very experienced. On the 22nd or 23rd, we will have our fair share of international fame, because we will be the arrangers of the post-COP webinar for boards. And we are working with some top panelists that will be announced soon. On 24th, you're welcome to join Morten Huse's academic webinar, Let's Make a Better World Together, and you find the details on our website. On October 4, we have a fantastic offer that is extended through the Danish board network, and it's going to the board's impact forum members only with limited seats. So we're going to mail out invite for you to join a live event focusing on governing for the long term. So keep your eyes out for that one. If you have other times, we are also super glad to be able to introduce some of the international chapters webinars. So for instance, the road to net zero together with Carbon Trust, you can look at that. Or what is next for the COP26 and the boardroom. Warm thanks to everybody, and we look forward to see you soon again.